welcome to this October bullet journal plan with me video. If you're new around here, hello, my name is Anna and today we'll set up this dark and cozy fall setup with some cute cats and rich brown tones. This is one of those themes that's hard for me to describe with one word, but it has a little bit of everything from paintings to some craft paper accents and of course planning layouts that will help you to be more focused and organized. But without further introductions, we are jumping right into this first spread that will just be a cover for this whole October layout. I go back and forth thinking if a cover spread is necessary or not, but most of the time I think it offers a great opportunity to be a little bit more creative and maybe create a bigger art piece that wouldn't necessarily fit into the rest of the setup. So this time we are creating this pretty interesting window setup with lots of black paper framing everything, and we're gonna get started by sketching the main frame here with a pencil. My main idea for this whole thing was to create a rainy window drawing with some simple elements to bring some life and coziness to this picture. So we are first sketching out the size of the window and adding the placements for the window panels. I wanted this to cover pretty much the whole page, and then we'll just have a little bit of room around the window to add some color and indication of the walls around it. I also wanted there to be these few overlapping elements, so this will be on top of the whole window decoration. First were these hanging leaves in the top corner that also help us to give a small color accent to this page. And after that, I also sketched out this cat in the bottom corner that's looking out of the window. But after this simple sketch is done, we are ready to take out gouache paints and start to add some color here. As you can see, the color palette is quite dark and very brown heavy, which was definitely something I wanted for this theme. I don't often use very dark colors, but especially October often seems to be a month for me when I feel like digging out my black papers and dark paints, so that's exactly what we are doing here. I started by painting the window frame since I'm gonna cut out the glass parts, but if you prefer not doing the cuts and instead just draw everything here on this page, I think coloring the background first and then adding the dark window frame on top of it will probably be an easier painting order. I also didn't bother being super precise here in the middle because I knew that I'll be able to straighten some of these lines a little bit with the paper knife. I tried to add some lighter and darker tones to the sides of the page to bring some life to it, but we are also gonna perfect and finish everything here later, so nothing needs to be super detailed at this stage. We are also gonna finish the rest of the details later. So after I finished painting the leaves, we are finally taking out the paper knife and I'm gonna use this for the window. I actually had some of my shop stickers on the other side of this page, so I was struggling cutting this a little bit, and in one point here I accidentally cut to the window frame part, so I tried to fix it a little bit with a small piece of washi tape on the other side. Also, going around the leaves especially was a little bit tedious here, so if I did this again, I think I would just paint the leaves directly on the window instead, so we wouldn't have to struggle with these cuts as much. But anyway, when we have all the glass parts cut out, it was time to start creating the actual window effect. I knew I wanted to do this by using tracing paper or vellum paper, whichever you want to call it. This paper is slightly see-through and it has this almost blurry appearance, so I wanted to paint something behind it that would maybe resemble some blurry trees outside. So I did this part with watercolors, and this really doesn't need to be anything special. All we want to do here is to make some color differences and maybe add this greenish color all around. The tracing paper actually ended up covering this even more than I thought, so I think adding even more contrast with the colors would have probably worked even better. So I was just working with the wet on wet technique to keep everything very blown out and messy. It also helps the colors to blend together a little bit better. And I was just going with these very dark tones. But after letting this beautiful watercolor creation completely dry, we are gluing both of these on top of each other. And after that, we can finally flip over the window to reveal the final result. So now that we have this blurry window effect here, it's time to start adding the final touches to the top painting part. So we're gonna start that from these raindrops. I painted these directly on the tracing paper, which I was a little bit worried about, but at least these small details didn't cause any problems in the paper. So I started by adding these different size dots with a white wash paint. They don't need to be perfectly round, and I also made a small tail for a few of them, so it will look like the drops are running against the window. Only adding this white paint won't really give the effect we want, but when we switch to a slightly darker color to add some shadows, you can start to see how it really transforms the whole look and creates that raindrop effect. So now we're just doing the same thing for the rest of the window and try to keep the dots very random. I think it's very easy to start adding the dots very symmetrically, but I think changing up the distance and making some groups here and there will give you a little bit more realistic outcome. But that's it for the whole window part, and then the very last step here was to add all the finishing touches to the painting itself. So at this point we can finally paint the cat, the open book here, and then add some final highlights and fixes to the rest of the page. I think generally the easiest way to paint with wash paints is by adding a solid background layer first and then building some details on top of it. So that's what we're gonna do here with the cat. I just added this middle brown tone and then started to apply some lighter and more orangey tones with a smaller brush, trying to mimic fur with these small strokes. To get this cat pop a little bit better against the background, you can try to add some lighter first strokes around the very edges of the cat, and then the back part will have the darkest shadows in this picture. But after adding some of these last painting strokes, the last thing I still wanted to do here was to add a little bit of this light gray and greenish tone to the white paper areas around the leaves, as they were standing out against the background a little bit too much for my liking, and this at least made them a tiny bit less visible. But after that's done, we are finally ready with this first page. I think this ended up looking a little bit darker and gloomier than I had in mind, but I still kind of like the window thing here. I definitely got so many ideas for these tracing paper decorations for some future themes, so keep an eye out for that. We will definitely have some fun with them. But now we'll just move on to the second page here, and I wanted this to be pretty simple. I did want to use this one typewriter paper pattern with this theme because I think it went so well with the other decorations. You can find this from my own shop, and I always try to avoid using decorations like this that you need to buy from a specific place, but I hope you can forgive me this time. I was actually planning to leave this page white first, but I felt like there was something missing here. So after I tried these decorations on top of this black paper, I thought it looked so much better and I decided to go with it. This black dot paper is from my Archer and Olive notepad, but any black copy paper or craft paper would do the same thing. I also thought that this theme would benefit from a typewriter style title font as well, so the font I'm using throughout this video is called American Typewriter. If you Google the name or search it from Pinterest, you can find a picture of all the letters in the alphabet, which makes it a little bit easier to use for any title you want. So I first sketched out all these letters with a pencil just to make sure that they are in the correct place, and then I colored them using this thicker black pen. But after the title and the small October calendar are in place, we're finally done with this first fully black cover spread. This style is very different from me, but I think in the end it kind of looks pretty cool. Definitely something that stands out from the rest of my journal. But anyway, it's time to move on, and next we're gonna set up a bigger monthly calendar, and we'll also have some habit trackers on this next spread. We're again gonna start from the decorations because I really wanted to create this brown check pattern on this first page here that would be a very nice background for the calendar. I personally think that check patterns suit almost any fall or winter theme, and I personally love the look of them. I have a check pattern washi tape in my shop's fall collection, and it's one of my favorite products in the whole collection, even though it's very simple. But creating a pattern like this by hand is also not that difficult, so I'll show you how you can do that at home. This brown craft paper I was using here doesn't have dots, so I was using the notebook to help me make some guidelines here first. So the main pattern here is very simple, and you can also switch the colors to almost anything, which makes this very versatile for any type of fall theme. So after we have some guidelines in place, all we are doing here is creating these diagonal strokes with each of these pens. The more precise you make these individual strokes, the less messy the final result will look like. To be honest, I was speeding some of these lines here a little bit because I knew the calendar will cover a big part of this. And if you're really low on time, you could also give up these individual strokes and just draw straight lines across. I think it would take a little bit away from the complexity and the blankety look of this, but it would definitely work as a pretty background pattern as well. The light pen I used here is not completely white. It has this cream tint, which I thought looked a little bit softer in this theme compared to a straight white. And I don't know if you can notice, but I actually made a small mistake here when calculating the distances. So the lower part is not completely symmetrical with the top half, but again, it was kind of covered, so I didn't bother doing all this work again. When we're done with the pattern, we'll just glue it to the first page, and then I added some white dot paper on top of it. I think this theme alone made my journal like twice as thick for all the gluing and layering we're doing here, but I always think that the look of it creates is well worth it. Also, to have small pieces of dot paper like this ready to go, I always save the pieces I cut out when I make Dutch door layouts in my themes. So saving those, for example, in the back pocket of your journal might come handy later. But anyway, here I just wrote another October title with the same font as we used earlier, and also wrote out the calendar. I made a small mistake here with the lines, so I had to use another piece of paper to kind of cover that mistake. This October is also one of those annoying months where you'll need 6 rows for each monthly calendar because the first and last days both happen to be on a different week. If you start your calendars from Sunday, you won't have that problem though. Anyway, now we're finally done with this calendar side, which ended up reminding me of a grandpa sweater. Maybe that's just me, but anyway, let's move on to this second page. Something I wanted to do throughout this theme was to cut these edges of the pages, so we'll later add a similar check pattern to the very last page of this whole theme. So when we cut these pieces, this pattern will show on every page. However, I also felt like this needed a black line here to divide the page a little bit, because otherwise the whole thing would have been very brown toned. So this black line just helps us to have some other contrast on this page. For some reason, I was feeling like adding a few happy trackers this month, so I'll use these brown boxes for that. Habit trackers are something that I just often forget to use, so they are not something I add in my bullet journal that often, but I thought it might be good to change things up every now and then, and maybe you guys would like to have some as well. I only added 4 boxes here, but if you want to have more, you could always use this whole page for them. I wanted to leave some room to the bottom for any random notes, since I won't really have a place to do that later in the setup. But anyway, that's all for the monthly calendar spread, and before we move on to the next spread, I quickly want to mention that there's a new washi tape collection that I designed for the washi tape shop. This set is called Waltz of the Flowers, which is also the name of a famous classical piece by Tchaikovsky. So as you can guess from the name, this set features some musical elements, dark flowers, and many decorations that would be perfect for this time of the year. So if you like the look, definitely go check it out. I have my affiliate link in the description and also my 10% discount code, so feel free to use them if you want. Your support is always very appreciated. But that's about that, and now let's get back to the journal. So next we're gonna set up a planning spread that will help you to make an overall plan for the whole month ahead and encourages you to think about a few specific priorities. I started by adding these small slivers of the typewriter paper to the edges. I usually really like the look of layering the edge decorations like this, so I wanted to try it out in this theme. But after that, we'll start to set things up from the planning title. I usually want my planning pages to have some room for overall weekly plans, so I started everything by dividing this section under the title into these 4 small spaces. I hope this will be enough room for me to write a little bit about the most important tasks that I would like to get done each week, and then we can leave all the more detailed planning and task lists to the weekly pages. After that, I wanted to add some dark colors here again with these craft papers, and I'll use this brown box to write about the things I want to focus on in October. I know many of us are guilty of taking too many projects and tasks on our plates at once, so a section like this might help you to eliminate things only to the most important ones. Then I finished this other page with a 4th quarter title. So I think here I'll just list some tasks and goals I would like to finish by the end of this year. I completely forgot to add a 3rd quarter planning page of my journal, so this time I at least wanted to have this small place for this quarter overall planning. But now that all the functional stuff is done, we can finish the spread with another gouache cat painting. I used this small piece of watercolor paper for it because I wanted to do some layering here again. So we are starting again from a pencil sketch, and I wanted this picture to be of a sleeping cat who is hugging a book and snuggled under some blankets. I'll speed up some of the sketching process here a little bit because it will be covered with the paints later anyway. But when we are done with it, we can start the coloring by applying some of these edge and background colors first. I didn't really focus too much on this background. All I wanted here was to again use some different shades of brown so that this picture would go well with the rest of the spread. So I think there's some sort of pillow under the cat, and then we'll add some very quick stripes to this brown blanket later. The cat was actually the last thing I painted here, and I was struggling with this a little bit. I think everything here started pretty well, but then I ran into some problems with the face, and I think it was because I was maybe trying too much here. We'll paint another cat later in the setup, which I feel like was a good example of how simple is sometimes better. And here I was just trying to add too many colors and lines. I lost the face shape a little bit on the way and didn't know which colors I wanted to use. But experiences like this are something that inevitably happens every once in a while when drawing or painting, and during those times I think it helps to remember that even a failed attempt will always teach us something. I wouldn't say this is a complete fail by any means. You guys are always the first to tell me that I'm too critical of my own paintings. So even though there were a few details here I didn't like that much, I think the painting as a whole still served the purpose for this whole spread. I actually finished some of the details after gluing this to the notebook because I wanted to see this painting against the other elements here. So again, I wanted to add some black paper to the background, and then I found this quote, which I've probably printed from my reading journal, but it was pretty much a perfect match with this painting, so I just added it here too. This is by Fernando Pessoa, and it says, "Literature is the most agreeable way of ignoring life." Isn't that so true? But after struggling with the painting for another 15 minutes and then giving up, that finishes our planning spread, and we can finally move on to create the weekly layout for October. I felt like squeezing things on this one spread this time, so to get a little bit more room to work with, we're gonna start by cutting this one middle page here to make this small Dutch door. After that, I kind of wanted to try out something crazy here by covering the whole spread with these black papers. I was actually really struggling with the layout design here, and I tried so many different things out of camera. There was something about these brown and black details that made it very difficult for me to come up with nicely balanced spreads. I also realized that maybe black and brown together is not my favorite look. I was definitely missing some color here while setting these up, but at the same time I struggled to find any color that wouldn't make everything look too messy here. So yeah, this weekly layout won't end up in my favorites, but I hope it will still be useful. These black papers were slightly smaller than my notebook paper, so I always colored the edges with a black pen just to get a little bit tidier appearance. But yeah, so I will have 2 weeks on both sides of this layout, and then I'll use these big task lists to probably list all my weekly tasks, but there's still a little bit room for adding a few things to the daily boxes too. I think I've never cut and glued this amount of small paper pieces. You can be sure that my table was full of glue after finishing this spread. To be honest, I'm not super excited to use these black areas because I'll need to have a white pen for that. But if I'm too lazy to use a white pen, I can always just use the task lists instead. I finished this other side out of camera. It's the exact same layout as the first one. And then that's it for all the weeks in October. So even though this layout didn't end up in my favorites, I'm still very excited to have all the weeks ready to go. But anyway, we still have one more spread to set up, which is of course the monthly reflection. So this is finally where we're adding this check pattern that I also drew out of camera to save some time, but I used the exact same pattern and colors as we did earlier. Then I drew some quick borders for this page and wrote out the reflection title before we can start with the final painting of this layout. So I thought we have to have another rainy window painting to tie everything together, and I also wanted to see how it would work to just draw that on this notebook without using the tracing paper. So this is definitely one of those paintings that looks very ugly and unpromising in the beginning, but this will all come together after we add the raindrops and the rest of the details on top. So I was just adding this very messy greenish gray color to the background. Again, I think leaving some darker and lighter spots here will make the end result a little bit more interesting. I also didn't bother with any window borders this time, so I decided to instead just line this with a black pen, and then after the background layers have dried, we can again start by adding those white dots of wash paint. I think the finer dots you're able to create, the nicer the end result will look like. So I tried to add some very small dots using a pretty dry brush, and then I repeated the same thing with the darker shade. But then let's finish all the details here. So I started from the coffee cup and the leaves, and then painted the cat last. I really don't know what to say here anymore. I think you've seen me paint with this same style throughout this video. So first we're adding the main color to the background, and then we'll add some highlights and shadows to bring out all the details in these elements. I was especially happy how these leaves turned out for some reason, and if in any point you feel like something blends too much to the background, you can add a small darker line to the border and it will usually help you out. Then I wanted this cat to be black and white this time, and as you can see, I kept the coloring very simple here. So there's just this very unified color in the background, and then I just added a few strokes of darker and lighter shades here and there, but without making anything too complex, and kind of keeping the details at the minimum. I personally think this worked much better than with the previous painting, and it was also much more enjoyable to work with. But after the painting is done, I finished this whole setup by adding these two questions in this last page. So these reflection pages are always a good opportunity to gather your thoughts, maybe think about how the last month went, and it's also a good opportunity to put yourself in a better mindset for moving on to the next one. But yeah, that finally finishes this dark October layout. I really hope you'll enjoy the paintings and maybe get some new ideas for your own journals. Also, if this was your first time around here and you'd like to see more, definitely consider subscribing. But after that, I guess that's all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and see you in my next one. Bye bye!